Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time to join us for today's webinar. So let's just jump right into it. If you are looking to reduce costs on your mainframe, what you'll find is this is an industry-wide issue. And what's really interesting, and we'll talk about this throughout today's presentation, is that the costs are significant when we talk about MLC, your monthly lease charge, MSU, millions of service units, which is how MIPS get converted into your actual bill. It's absolutely significant, but what we've really learned through the pandemic is that the real issue here is a lack of business agility and a lack of sustainability. Companies are doing fine for the most part, paying their bills, the large IBM customers. But as we've seen with state and federal government, as well as large companies, time to market when you're dealing with changes in a mainframe environment is absolutely killing them. So you're not alone. What's interesting when I look at these facts, it tells you that all the big brands that you know and work with and depend on are mainframe customers, and that's not a bad thing. It's been a very reliable platform for a long time. Where do these facts come from? The first three come out of IBM's annual report, so we consider these authoritative because that is a regulated piece of content. The last one is something I gleaned out of a Gartner research article. I believe it was called the IT Key Metrics Database. They update that every year. Excellent read if you have a Gartner subscription. Now, what's interesting, another fact I learned from that particular research article is when we talk about MLC and MSU, Gartner sizes that at 68% of the total cost of mainframe. What's really interesting is you say, well, what's the other, percent of that? Of that 32%, roughly 30% is labor. I want you to just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through the presentation and you think about all the outsourcing and layoffs and changes to IT operating models you've dealt with over your career. Ask yourself why we're focused on the smallest percent of cost. So we know this is difficult. We know it takes time. And in a prior role that I had as chief architect, my employer was, looking to essentially greenfield all of their systems, decommission their mainframe. I'm not saying that that's what you should do or that is or isn't right for you. What I'm saying is that was their strategy and it worked well for them. In my time, I spent 6 years on that journey. It took them well over a decade. Now, when you think about solving a problem like cost reduction for your mainframe systems, or even something much larger and grander than that, moving these systems to the cloud, completely replacing your mainframe, you come up with a set of assumptions, beliefs about the future, and having, taken thousands of steps on that journey, I can tell you it's difficult, and everything you believe to be true at the beginning, even 5 years into it, continues to change in ways you never anticipated. Many of them for the worse. The business environment changes, customer needs changes, the competitive environment becomes more competitive with other offerings in the marketplace. Costs generally go up, complexity generally increases. Fortunately, technology tends to improve over time. Particularly when you look at things like, we've all experienced the rise of cloud. What I found when I was solving this problem, what I continue to see as I look across our competitive landscape, I look across, reflect on everything where technology touches your own personal life over the last 20, 25 years. We have mobile phones, we have the internet in our pocket, we have the internet, we have self-driving cars. The real challenge here is there's just a lack of innovation. There's a lack of industry focus. There's really nobody doing anything new from in the cloud providers or open source movements. Um, think about how many systems that you've seen worked on. Think about the companies that make the products I've just talked about. Do you think Amazon or Google is coding systems in COBOL? Do you think that's what their cloud platform is built on? Is iOS or Android written in COBOL? Think about how many different systems of engagement and systems of record that have been built, embedded systems, Internet of Things. Nothing's in COBOL, and the world is moving around this center of gravity so fast that it just needs to be addressed and solved. The reality is that most companies just have more failures than they have success with this problem. And the problem is that today's solutions are all big bang. What does big bang mean? Okay, change the code, convert the data, replatform the system, problem solve upstream and downstream integrations, particularly in your batch cycle. Now you're on a different platform, so you got to manage data coherency for shared data. You got to coordinate job schedulers across platforms, aggregate logs. The list goes on. What didn't we talk about? All the changes in your organization. Where are you going to get these people? How are you going to manage that change? It's really not a simple problem to solve. I don't know how many people are familiar with TSB. What I found interesting about this case study, IEEE wrote a great article about it, and they covered more than just the TSB failure, which was roughly 500 plus million to move to a new banking platform. What's interesting, and I want you to just keep this in the back of your mind as we move through the presentation, what caused the issue with 1.9 million mobile users to be locked out of their accounts when they went live, it wasn't a code issue. It wasn't a problem with, anything having to do with the software. It was a problem in their data migration. Changing data when you're trying to optimize or improve the business, optimize costs, changing your data is a risky business. 1.9 million mobile users locked out. This is a bank. They have really strong controls about testing and change management. Really crazy. So where do you start? You're looking at saving money, reducing costs. You're trying to figure this out. You might look at vendor tools. You might look at a consulting company that has a great approach. Challenge is you point that solution at something that is self-contained. You can time box it, and you run the risk of really not proving that the tool or the approach is going to solve for all of your needs. Potentially critical non-functional gaps. The other challenge that we see with this is often a lot of these legacy systems, you're just out of options. The only way that you could really wring out cost savings is looking for opportunities to do business process optimization. Now you're trying to effectively, rewire a legacy system to support modern business processes to get savings out of both operations and technology. And what I've seen over and over is when you conflate cost reduction and business process optimization, you have a project too big to succeed, and you will not succeed, or you will be one of the amazing outliers who did. In terms of mistakes, if you're on this call, you've seen them made, you've worked for people who've made them, you've probably made some. I'm raising my right hand now saying, these are mistakes I've made. Biggest thing I've done wrong, lack of cross-functional alignment on objectives and key results. Thinking I have everybody bought into what success looks like and how we measure it. The other thing that we see now, and this has been building with more and more pressure over the last 2 decades, it's been a theme, is not delivering cost savings within 3 to 6 months. When you are doing a cost savings project, a 2 or 3 year turnaround, even a year investment is just too long. When you're doing cost savings or modernization, time is the enemy is a favorite quote of mine from Rocky, if you're a Rocky fan. Time takes everybody out. You do not want to be on a cost savings project that has a multi-year plan to deliver benefits. Best practices, I hate the term, my colleagues know it. The real challenge with this slide is I could call this slide don't be stupid, but that would be rude. Could also call it a list of good ideas. What I find interesting about best practices and what we've listed here on this slide, when you think about how individuals make decisions, given access to sufficient information, people generally make good decisions. We're wired to avoid risk. It's primal. What I found throughout my career is how organizations tend to do the opposite. And what I learned through consulting, people much smarter than me sort of helped me understand this is your compensation structures and that internal, air quotes, healthy competition between leadership. It motivates risk taking, which I get it. It's how companies differentiate themselves and generate alpha. But that risk taking and camaraderie leads to this optimism bias, and that optimism bias often becomes contagious. And the best practice that I could really tell people is just when you're building consensus cross-functionally on trying to save costs, try to partner up with colleagues that have what I call team survival instinct. You really want to be mindful of that optimism bias. CloudFrame Relocate.
Greg, let's pause for a second. You mentioned a couple of great points there around the risk and mistakes and not making the situation worse, which is AKA best practices. Is there a place that we can get more information, more details about those ideas?
Oh yeah, uh, I, I I keep a blog on our website, so you'll find a handful of those articles out there. So
Okay, great.
www.cloudframe.com.
Great. I'll grab those articles, and if anyone's interested, please just drop a note to me in the chat, and I'll make sure that we get those in the follow up. All right, Greg, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about Relocate.
Thanks, David. So I'd like to introduce you to what I believe is the fastest, lowest risk way to reduce COBOL MIPS consumption, which generally will lower your application costs as well as help your enterprise lower their costs. Let's talk about a case study. Really interesting, similar to my experience. This telecom customer had a mandate from the CEO. The CEO decided that he did not want his IT systems based on mainframe technology. Don't know all the reasons why, but that was his decision. The architecture group did what architecture groups did. They went through and they sort of used Gartner's 7 Rs, figured out which systems would make sense to rehost, replace, retire. Rehosting is difficult with COBOL. There are solutions, but ultimately they didn't want to be in COBOL either. For this particular system, what was interesting is they chose a greenfield approach for the successor system. Now, the challenge they had is that they were under constant cost pressure. It wasn't enough that they were just rebuilding the system. The department responsible for this system had to show year-over-year cost reductions. And what that was leading to was this cycle of more layoffs and more outsourcing. And what they found is the more they had to lay people off and outsource, the more they delayed making progress on the strategic rewrite of their system. Kind of funny how that happens when you fire your most knowledgeable and talented and productive people, that effectively lose your ability to deliver the solution that you need. When they came to CloudFrame, they were excited. They didn't have a lot of time to prove results. And within 90 days, what we were able to do was install CloudFrame and demonstrate financial and technical feasibility. And a business case was put together forecasting $2 million in cost savings by just moving their non-production workloads out to AWS using CloudFrame Relocate. I'll get into some of the details of how that works. So they installed us. They spent another 3 months. They added us to their upper environments, sort of UAT production. And what that did is it solidified a business case of saving $4 million a year, year over year. That customer is now in year 3. There's a couple takeaways, right? As they moved more workloads to CloudFrame, they saved more money. Greenfield approach to building systems, they didn't expect to need CloudFrame for 3 years or 4 years. They're grateful to have this product to help them find a way to fund modernization and achieve their cost savings objectives while they still rely on this legacy system. Now, this same approach is being used by a UK energy company, a Canadian insurance company, and a global credit card network. So, it's something that we're seeing widely used across geographies as well as industries. Remember that TSB case study when I was talking about how risky it is to change data? CloudFrame Relocate requires no changes to your code, your data, your job scheduler. You install CloudFrame Relocate on the mainframe and you can shift compute out to the public cloud. You can shift compute to hybrid cloud in your own data center. You can run Java on Z because effectively what CloudFrame does, it is taking your legacy COBOL application and it's transpiling it to Java. IBM has provided everybody the opportunity to run Java on their mainframes on the zip processor. It's not guaranteed to run if you don't have capacity, but it is eligible. So you have the opportunity to use CloudFrame Relocate to effectively run your workloads anywhere you choose without changing your COBOL code, without changing your data, without changing your job scheduler or CICS transactions configurations. This is literally the opportunity to invest dimes to save dollars. Now, what's really cool is that as you shift workloads off the mainframe, which is what our telecom customer was doing for their non-production workloads, is often what you'll find, particularly in your batch cycles, is that you have a lot of data that's only used within a single job or within that a couple job steps. And while CloudFrame could run in public cloud and read and write data on the mainframe or even call load modules that are still on the mainframe, it can also emulate vSAM and QSAM file systems in public or private cloud. So you actually have the opportunity to move some of your storage to commodity cloud storage, as well as improve or should say reduce the cycle time latency of doing those remote reads and writes. Access to DB2, and this is interesting, we'll talk about that a little more as well. Access to DB2 is done through JDBC. What's interesting about accessing DB2 through JDBC, all of that or most of that logic now or access becomes zip eligible on the mainframe. So, I mean, IBM's done a great job here with supporting Java and creating the financial incentives. And CloudFrame is giving companies a way to really take advantage of those incentives without needing to make, decades long investments in Java development. In terms of, what do I have to do to get started? It's really exactly what you would expect. You install CloudFrame on your mainframe, you integrate it with your change management system like Endeavor, ChangeMan, homegrown system, and you do a one-time migration. Now that doesn't mean that you need to recompile or change your existing system. It just means that there's outputs from your existing build process that CloudFrame will use as inputs to effectively generate the Java version of your application. And once that's done, you're able to continue to run your COBOL load module if you need to, or run the CloudFrame version of that code, and you can run it anywhere you would like.
Greg, you mentioned backward compatibility on this slide. And also I noticed there or listened to you talk about data equivalency back in the case study. Can you talk about the ways that we might be able to prove that if we're in a customer situation in a pilot, for instance, how do we go about proving that?
Sure. So I get asked this question a lot. And what we do is you take a typical batch application and you're doing, file processing quite often. You might access some DB2 tables. The way we do regression testing at CloudFrame and the way we encourage our customers to do it is we run a batch job and we save all the outputs, whether those outputs are a flat file, vSAM, or DB2 table. In the case of DB2 tables, we just unload the data to a flat file. We then run those same inputs through the CloudFrame version of the code. Again, go through the process of capturing the outputs wherever they might be. And then we use a binary compare utility to prove that the data is exactly the same. So if you're running CloudFrame on the mainframe, I think everybody has Super C. It does an awesome job. And what you'll find is, other than things like, timestamps where you would expect those to be different across run units, every other byte will be identical between the COBOL load module and the CloudFrame Java application. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, Greg,
Yeah.
that does. It seems like we're asked that a lot and asked to prove it a lot, I guess.
We absolutely are. And like I said, we're happy to help people with that.
Okay.
So when we talk about lowering mainframe chargebacks, it's a large number. It's recurring cost coming, generally coming out of expense budgets. It's year over year cost savings. And it's not just the COBOL compute that becomes zip eligible, right? That embedded SQL becomes zip eligible as well when CloudFrame runs it. And what's really cool is, you might be saying, oh yeah, but if we run JDBC, it's all dynamic SQL. No, actually, CloudFrame can run that your COBOL static bound SQL. So when you compile a link and bind your DBRM, or I should say, bind your DBRM, CloudFrame is able to run that static SQL. And I know many organizations, they find that appealing. Some organizations, though, have asked for the ability to run dynamic SQL. So we support both. The takeaway here is, if you're looking to reduce costs, CloudFrame gives you a pretty straightforward way, with a well-defined set of steps in a very short period of time, to prove out those cost savings. CloudFrame is a force multiplier for cost reduction. We look at,
And I guess that goes back to the Gartner report that you mentioned earlier, where the big majority of the cost associated with mainframe, what 64-68% was associated with that.
yeah, yeah, it's pretty
Great.
staggering. I confess my jaw dropped when I read that number. I believe it was like, for large mainframe shops, which I believe Gartner considers over 30,000 MIPS. It was like 22% was MSU, 22% of total cost, 46% was MLC, and all the rest was like the fully loaded cost of employee labor, benefits, everything, the building that the people in the mainframe sat in, the electricity, the water, coffee cups, toilet paper, you name it. So you think about that, it's really pretty amazing how much money is going into compute and software licensing. So
Right. It
eh,
seems like Relocate's addressing the right problem for the biggest bang for the buck.
I want to believe so. That's the feedback we're getting. The question that we'll typically ask your CIOs, CTOs is, what would you suddenly do if you had 7, 8, 9 figures of expenses moved out of your expense budget on your mainframe side? How would you invest that? And that becomes a much more exciting conversation to have. And it's a much more constructive conversation to have with your peers at that level, instead of talking about mainframe capacity needs to be increased, the cost of that mainframe capacity, and all the pain points associated with, lack of business agility in that environment. So, we
Yeah,
think that we're really creating opportunities for customers to make the changes they want, and helping them find the funding to do it.
good, good, good.
So with that, I mean, I'd like to open it up to see if there's any questions.
One question that does come up is around how people get started with CloudFrame Relocate. I think you mentioned earlier pilot projects. Maybe you can give me a summary of how that might work with a shop that's actually looking to see if they have cost reductions that can be real for them.
Yeah, sure. We've um, we've certainly learned, from customers we're working with, starting with our first customer, where within a matter of 90 days, they were able to install, prove out, and build a business case, to make the purchase for, for a long period of time. And it comes down to a handful of steps, right? Most important, as I mentioned earlier, you've got to define and align, what success looks like with your stakeholders. You miss that very important point, and you might as well not even get started. And then you get into some of the nitty gritty details of work. Install CloudFrame, right? It's tangible work. It takes time. Often your systems programmers that install this have a large backlog, so that's something you want to start on right away. When I talked about, migrating applications, right? You've installed CloudFrame, and now you just need to, take some group of programs for a particular application or system, and you need to enable them to run under CloudFrame. Once you've done that, it's a matter of testing them out. And I think there was a question earlier about, how do we test out functional and data equivalency? And once you've done that, it's just a matter of calculating the benefits. Again, if it's a batch job, it's as easy as opening up the job logs and looking at the difference from the load module to the CloudFrame version to see how much CPU time, was or wasn't consumed. And then, putting together a business case on that has historically been simple. We're working with customers now, and they build an actual sort of internal, I'll call it like a challenge, like a 90-day challenge. Customers are trying to use gamification to get different teams to compete to see, how much cost savings they can get, achieve with CloudFrame Relocate in a 90-day period. So it just gets back to, gamification on the mainframe to reduce costs. Like, nobody's innovating in this space anymore. So our customers are just really excited that, it's like we've brought fire to the cavemen, they've told us.
I don't think we have any other questions in the queue. So thank you, Greg, for taking us through this. I hope everyone has enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking with you later. Take care. Bye-bye.